Hello guys, welcome to new lecture. Today I think I will be discussing about problems because nowadays we have many people who cannot solve their problems and it's bothering them. And let's discuss what does it mean problem and how we can solve the problems. Problems in our life is connected to them. Our life connected to them. There is no escaping them. No matter how you try to avoid problems, no matter how you treat them, you will still encounter them from time to time. It's inevitable. Problems make us feel some discomfort and sometimes even fear, depending on what kind of problems we encounter. But no matter how we feel about them, how we react to them, one thing is certain: something has to be done about them, about problem. And that doesn't always mean that they have to be solved. It also means that some of them have to be learned to live with. Then a person will feel good, confident, and even happy, no matter what problems they already have in their life and what else will arise. In this lecture, I will teach you how to do this and how to solve your problems and how to learn it. I will tell you how to look at the problems, how to solve them, how to get along with them, and in order to feel normal and not to be afraid of anything. Let's say if you have a problem, try to solve it. If you can't solve it, then don't make problem out of it. And what's the problem? The main interesting question. You can find many definitions of problem. A problem is a problem. A problem is a problem that has no solution. Let's say. More precisely, there is a solution, but it's not known to the person who solved the problem. So it turns into a problem for him. And since our lives are full of problems that we do not know how to solve, we will all have a great many problems. Another thing is that we do not face all of them directly. Not all of them problems, not all the problems that we do not know how to solve, we even need to solve. This is why most of the problems that exist in the world of bypass us. The problem can also be personal failure to accept something, for example, and they're natural but undesirable to him. In other words, problem can be anything that a person himself considers a problem for himself. Not so much because he does not understand it also is this too, but because he cannot accept, agree with it. But here we can say that problem don't here we can say that people don't accept something also because they don't understand why it's necessarily and because they don't know how to live with it. And people don't know how to live with it, a lot of things in the world, and therefore don't want to. They do not accept the world as the whole in everything that is in it. So they see problems in many things. They are desirable for themselves, which is reality, not there. These are the kind of problem that we often have to deal with it in psychology. People not they not that they encounter and solve problems, they rather do not want to see in their life some phenomena that are natural to it. For example, violence, which has always been there, but which maybe but which many people do not like it, and mainly because they're afraid of it. They see violence as a problem, which is not entirely true. It is probably impossible to live without violence altogether. Also, is it possible and necessary to reduce its manifestation. People have had some success in this direction, but to completely renounce violence as well as many other things in this life is impossible. This means that one has to accept these things, even if one has to work with them and over them. But one has to accept them in order not to consider them a problem for oneself. Let's say this can be considered as adjustment to the world. Well, problems can also be subjective. And this is when a particular person can solve some problems and it becomes a problem for him. Even he sees a problem in something, not accepting something, not agreeing with something. And objective problems can be when no one or most people can solve the problem, and therefore it becomes a problem for them. Even all or most of people do not accept something in life, as a norm and usual becomes a problem for them. For example, the problem of death is a common problem for many people who do not want to put up with it, who consider it something bad, abnormal, undesirable, something that to be avoided and better not to think about it. This is an objective virtual problem that does not exist by itself. It lives in the mind of many people. And the objective real problem can be considered, for example, the problem of wars, which affect the lives of many people, making them worse. The problem is quite solvable. Even it's difficult to solve, but complete is possible. But it can be dealt with it a large extent. Now let's talk about the unusual side of the issues, the benefits we get from the some sorts of problems. What kind of benefit we can get? Usually people avoid problems because they're morally and physically draining, creating discomfort and sometimes pain, both mental and physical. Therefore, people do not have a great desire to solve any problems. And many cannot even imagine that there are benefits from problems, almost always. It's not always the same, but it's always there. The person should always look for this benefit when he has another problem. For people, a problem is something wrong, something that shouldn't be there, but in fact it should be, because problems are very significant part of this life, and the main benefit of them is to keep person awake and conscious and state in his inner qualities. When I speak of awake state, I mean the vigilance and mental tension that one uses to solve problem. If there were no problems such something incomprehensible and undesirable, people will live a completely predictable, extremely primitive life, predictable, unchangeable world, in unchangeable world, which will make their lives unbearably boring and their life extremely primitive. After all, why to think about anything if you have no problems? You can live your life asleep without straining your mind at all. Such life can be lived an automatic, just a dream when everything goes by itself and you are a simple observer. A problem, and even more so big problems, is a great exercise for the mind and means of tempering one's character. This is how we should look at it, as a means of making us stronger. Problems give us the exercise we need for our mind. Just as physical activities give us exercise we need to for our muscles, and the problems is the exercise for our mind. If you lie in the bed all day and do nothing, your muscles will atrophy and you will become a totally unlivable being, physically and spiritually very weak. It's the same with the mind. If all sorts of problems do not load, it will become less and less effective until eventually it will become so weak that the person will not be able to solve even the simplest everyday task with its help. The next thing is which the next thing in which problems are helpful is change. Through the problems, a person can begin to change his life. And some problems themselves change his life. Sometimes it's simply impossible not to change something in yourself, in your life, when you face certain problems that will force you to do something new, something special, which you have never done before. Life is always changing, nothing in this world is forever. And the more survivable a person will be, the faster and more accurately he will adjust to these changes. You know, survival of the fittest. So problem is not avoided, ignored, feared, make us more adaptable to life and therefore more resilient, and that's why they are good for us. And the only thing important to keep in mind in this matter that problems do not harm the individuals in their seriousness in relation to the abilities of the individual. Each person must accustom accustom himself to dealing with problems in such a way that he can regularly solve problems that will not lead him into a state of despair and break him morally. Because very serious problem which a person face, being absolutely unprepared for them, can psychologically suppress him, break him, after which he will become only weaker and more vulnerable to external difficulties. Of course, it is possible to guess what fate will strike you in order to prepare for it at once, but we can All look at the problem that we can afford and solve them regularly. Not to avoid them, not to be afraid of them, but to look for them and even to select them from the existing ones in order to solve them, and thus to strengthen our mind, physical, in order to be ready to solve more complicated problems which life may present us at the most unexpected moment in our future. Let's say how we can solve problems. For example, other people's problems. To succeed in solving problems and become morally resilient to them, you have to try to solve not only your own problems, but also other people's problems, or even predominantly other people's problems, which are always like plentiful because many people are happy to done them or someone else. This is a great opportunity for development to solve other people's problems. Any activity that involves solving other people's problems always requires a special mental effort on the part of people. It's not just sort of out of one's own life. It's much broader range of activities. And person through such work becomes prepared for many problems, which he will able to click like seed if they appear in his own life, because he has already solved them more than once. One person deals with a problem more often and learns from someone else's examples what it means to be in this that problematic situation. Many problems will choose the problems for him. They will turn in the task that he knows how to solve, thanks to experience of working with them. The work of a psychologist, for example, is morally demanding a job because a specialist in this field constantly has to deal with other people's problems, which people dump on him chaotically. And not everyone can do this work, just like any other cases where it's necessary to constantly go into the head of people's problems, think about them, look for solutions, and apply them with the help of clients themselves, who are not always ready to follow the instructions for all the specialists. There are many moments that can mentally exhaust the specialist. That's why not everyone is willing to do this kind of work. People believe that they have enough problems of their own to fill their heads with other people's problems. So they try to avoid problematic, complaining, uh, winning people who take a lot of energy with their complaints about life. Everyone wants to deal with the people who give energy, not take it away. But such work make a specialist intellectually and physically stronger, psychologically strong also. His psyche with the time adapt the emotional and intellectual stress, and other people's problem will not be as painful as his own as they were at the beginning when they first started dealing with them. People do not realize that problems cause their discomfort and suffering not because they are there, but because people themselves are not used to them. They are not accustomed to dealing with them regularly. Get into and start solving other people's problems, and after a while you will get used to this work, after which it will be much easier for you to deal with your own problems. Well, let's talk about how to work the problems below. The logic of problem solving. What kind of logic we have? And there is no problem that cannot be solved because it will contradict the logic of the world, which clearly shows that the more we learn about it, the more problems originally unsolved, and therefore a problem for us we can solve. Therefore, any problem unsolvable only until we learn it. Knowledge plus thinking, it means of solving problems. We have knowledge and we have thinking, the means of solving problems. Both need to be constantly improved. Then problems will easier to deal with it. They will never disappear. But to think a knowledgeable person, thinking a knowledgeable person, they will not be something that cause and suffering. As the logic of problem solving, that methodology of problem solving simplified version is quite simple to understand. Problem solving begins with a gradual search for information on the unknown that make a problem. To do this, the problem is broken down into the constituent path so that it's clear what exactly we do not know, what exactly we don't know, and do not understand in each specific part of the problem, due to which it had become a problem for us. More often than not, such a breakdown of problem begins with examination of history. We look for the moment from which the problem has become problem for us. If it's possible to go even further back to see what led to the situation which in turn led us to the problem. And if you want, you can study history of these situations to see even better the change of cause and effect that led us to current link. But this delving into the history of problem in many experience with various problems is not always appropriate because there are a lot of factors that influence and occurrence of different situations in our lives. Not all cause and effect relation can be taken into account. In order to speak confidently about the detailed chronology, chronology of events that caused the birth of the problem, we have to go into detail in that. That's to say, it can be just harmful to analyze a problem in more detail, going deep and deeper into history, as it can be go refrain from such work altogether. Such an analysis can require a lot of time and effort from the person, from the people who are solving the problem, without giving a tangible result, but only confusing the situation more. Because I repeat, not all factors influence the emerge of various situations, leading to the emerge of the problem. We are not able not only to study but even notice. There is reasonably in order to save resource and time to pay more attention to the most obvious cause that led us to problem situation, not so far away to mentally return to the deeper past to study the history of emerge of these causes. The easiest thing to do the first stage of problem solving to identify the moment when our personal interference of the course or event gave rise to problem. Let's take a simplest generalized example. Something is not working out for you and what you are doing now. You don't see the you don't seem to getting the result you want, as you conclude that you have problem because you don't know what else you need to do, how you need to do to get the result you want. To solve this problem, you need to decompose into the component parts. And what is the constituent part? The first part is the case that the idea in which your business began. When your business began, the story of birth of your problems began. You convinced times that you took action with or without plan. This all depends on the complexity of the idea. This is the beginning of the problem. Even in the beginning, it was not as the such, and this part of your problem, you need to find out what was the basis of your plan, what knowledge, thoughts, and assumption give you confidence that such thing can be done at all and that you need. That's you need to understand your motives and the ideas about your business. Maybe it's absurd, it's logic, maybe such thing is impossible to do at all, at least in current reality. And you look at for some reasons believing that it can be done by you. And why? That's what you have to work with to avoid messing and around with the subsequent components of the problems. It's wise to first deal with the reasonably of intentions and ideas in which it's based. But suppose you have reason to believe that thing you're doing can be done because you have examples of other people doing it. You have the perfect theory that says that this or that goal is achievable. Then you need to move on the next part of the problem, action. An action plan, if you have one, does when you have justified for yourself necessity for your cause and its reasonableness, having weighted all the pros and cons, you need to take part of properly all the action that you did and that you had to do in order to carry out this plan of yourself. In action always consists of different steps. We can say different steps, let's say, and consequently of the intermediate result achieved from each step to take. You have to know how to do each step or steps, let's say. If we are taking about the simplest action and what the result must be achieved so that you are sure that you are doing everything right. Let's say you decided to build a house and then the first step you have to take in addition to plan finance source, digging a foundation, pit and other thing that we'll consider as a small steps. So lay the foundation, the first step. After all, the foundation of the construction of the house begins not with the same roof or walls. First, the foundation laid, the next stage of work, the next, and so on, the end. After each stage, such stages, we record the result. We'll look at what we got, how well it turned out, whether everything goes according to our plan. For example, you have to know how to lay foundation, what it requires, what specific task to solve. That's assuming that in this stage you can cope with the task at hand and build a house. And you have to learn how to lay a foundation. You have to assess the result of laying it. Make sure that everything finding the part, the problem you are solving, the problem with building a house. When it exists, concerns such part of its laying a foundation. And if there is no problem with that, then you must consider the next step. The another step is on until you come across something. Some step are steps you don't know how to do it, at which the successful solution of the problem is interrupted. And then you have to study the link chain of you should look the foundation and look for information. Thing in order to understand how to make this step move on solving your problem, which lose its status as a problem because you will have a solved one and the constituent parts. At least you come to across something again as unclear unknown while making a study your other steps. That's what you do with all cases. Let's understand how the problems arise them, where exactly they arise, and try to divide two steps and solve it. And in what stage and which you have to study and know those links in order to solve the problem. Step by step, everything is done, and the intermediate result is evaluated. And more complicated problem, and the more such steps, it should be broken down and make it easier to solve it, and not to let it turn at a problem. When we evaluate our actions, looking at these intermediate steps in our work, we look at what we did according to the plan. For example, the theory, whether these steps were taken in the right order, because it also turned out the problem appears. Because inconsistency of action, that result doesn't appear because another sequences or action is necessary for its occurrence. And then if everything is normal, all steps done correctly, and the right sequence, we we see what results we got. Here also it's necessary for to be alternative to see the intermediate success if it's very small, because sometimes it happens that person see a problem in what is not there because he think that he has not reached the goal, although he is already halfway to it, but doesn't understand. For example, with the same house, the person may want to quick result at the stage of laying the foundation, conclude that house is not built because it doesn't have a roof. Also, the intermediate results show that everything going right, but time for the roof has not yet come. That's why it's necessary to evaluate the realization of the case step by step to understand whether the problem is at all or it's at all about all about time, which needs more until the final main result is achieved. If this is how the problem appears, then it's due to the calculation of the time, not to make mistakes in actions, not knowing how to produce it. The person simply does not understand the time frame in which is in this case can be solved and mistakenly believe that he is doing something wrong and therefore sees his case as a problem. In other words, he is not patient and therefore problem is not real. His problem is not real, but imaginary. It's solely in his head. And the last part in case that must be dealt with in order to understand exactly what the problem is a consequence of implementation. We can deal with our intention. We can deal with our action, with the sequence of our steps and intermediate result. But still, in this case, many ultimately not produce the desired result because the implementation can lead to such consequences that cancel the previous set goal. That deed will be done and done correctly, and the result obtained but it will lead to something undesirable. Well, let's say a person decided to create a business and get rich with its help, and eventually he created a business but didn't get rich, even vice versa, even impoverished, and because he got into debt, spent all his savings as well as time and didn't let his other important things, and this has become a problem for him. He doesn't understand why his life, as a result, he repeat all the stages starting from the creation condition for its accuracy, ending with the final result. Everything can be correct, except the result in the form of full return from the achieved goal, improvement for the material situation. Why does this happen? Why does something after done devalue itself and in the end the problem is solved because a problem solved becomes a problem. Solved problem becomes problem. As if it had not been solved? Or this is a very important question. The answer is misunderstanding of cost of his desires or his goal. Simply put, simply put, any goal, any desire has a price or its cost. If you do not take them into account, the person will solve problems and get the planned result, but will not have the desired outcome of their actions. An example of a house, it may look like this house was built, but no joy. Or I got rich, but I wasn't happy. Or you found your love, but it led you not to joy, but to misery. You can also state that person has achieved a victory, but it did not bring joy or expected benefit, as it gives that less than takes away. This is why it is necessary to approach problem with the broadest possible perspective, especially in the context of time, either to see in advance the consequences of the deed done and not to consider them as a problem, what was supposed to happen. Along with one was waiting for having seen unintended consequences, achieved one goal, either to accept them at inevitable cost or switch to another goal is one of the is if one is not ready to pay to obligatory, let's say to pay obligatory price for realization of his desires. A problem may not always be a result of unsolved. Let's say a problem may not always be a problem may not always be the same of unresolved problem. Let's say, nor does it always arise from a person's ignorance, a lack of understanding of how to solve a particular problem. The problem is not always something that person does not know how to deal with it. It's not uncommon for problem to be simply the result of person limited view of the situation. When he does not understand the result, he gets the best possible or best known in such cases and should not expect more. Coming up a problem because his idea of the idea. Well, it's like creating an engine that will work according to no physical principles, but will not meet the requirement of man conception to create perpetual motion machine capable of generating energy from nothing. In this case, possible result will be obtained, not ideal one, but maybe an ideal result is possible, but achieving it will require solving some problems or completely different plane. Therefore, it's not necessary to see the problem of what obtained, taking into account the possible in the relations between people, such logic or better said, such desires of people are expressed in the fact that people want to see in each other such a deal that would combine incompatible qualities, more precisely mutually exclusive. This is what creates a problem for them when they see that they do not have a such idea, but there is something that is possible and which in particular case may be quite sufficient, and striving for the deal. It's possible to remain with nothing at all. Here we return to the first component of any problem related to the cause that person wants to do, the conception of goal and desire. All this stage is desirable, though not always possible to assess the consequences and cost of implementing one's idea and one's desire at least. It's necessary to understand that any done deed, any achieved goal, any realized wish will have merits and its disadvantages. It's impossible to go into the water without getting soaked, so one must be ready to for that. This is how it turns out that sometimes the problem arises only in person's head and it must be solved. In real life, there may be no problem. The only result of adequate, let's say, adequate certain conditions in real life is of that a problem can be solved. All steps to solve it can be carried out without any unforeseen intermediate result, and all goals achieved. One of the consequences of achieving these goals may cause dissatisfaction, also they were unavoidable. Person's life may turn out according to his action, which exactly the kind of life that can give. He will see as a problem in his life, it's not his liking, believing that should be done otherwise, but it's only in his mind that it should be different, and life exists on its own rules. Therefore, it will be logical to conclude if we want to solve a problem, we can start from the end, by making sure that it exists outside our head. Because if it's only in our head, that's where it should be solved without trying to change anything in outside world. So as not to create new problems, which would already be more real. However, this rule is not absolute, so sometimes we can adjust this world to our ideal ideas about it. It's not for nothing that there is idea according to which we are born to make a fairy tale come true. And it's if person sees for himself it's a problem in what has always been a norm, it doesn't mean that he cannot solve it. In reality, not only in his head, but also doesn't mean that such solution would be easy. For example, uh, for the main question in such case, how to do what we want, and there may be no real answer, and no one knows where to look it, but it definitely exists somewhere. In order to find such answer, it's necessary to use scientific logic, and essence of which boils down to search for the new. The in let's say we have inevitable problems. The most important thing to understand about problems is that they're inevitable. Their life is impossible without problems, because problems open the world to us from the unknown perspective. They constantly teach us something new. In addition, sometimes problems simply can't be ignored. They have to be solved by ourselves or with someone else's help. They can't be avoided or ignored with all our will. Simply, if you don't deal with them for a long time, they aggravate, accumulate, and then hit us so hard that you may not be able to, you will not able to withstand the blow. Some problems cause people to break down so badly that they can lose their personality altogether. And problems can also lead to the death of person. Therefore, it's better not to avoid them in your life, but on the contrary, to meet them at the expense of your activity. After all, the more you want to achieve life, the more you will have problems. Let's say, after all, the more you want to achieve something in life, the more you will have problems. Problems accompany success, strength, and greatness. The greater person, the more serious the problem he will face. You could also say that you can tell the greatness of person by the kind of problem he's dealing with. Great people, ambitious people have much more serious problems than those why who do not stand out of from the mainstream. But great people treat their problems much more calmly than do people of lower rank who have small problems and panic over them. I think I'm gonna finish about the problems because I have said many detailed information about problems and how to solve the problems. Also, I believe that person should not be conditioned from childhood to live and to an problematic, easy life, helping him in every way possible. He must cope with his own difficulties, must fight for his own interests without outside help, with few exceptions when his problems exceed his abilities to many times over. The less we interfere a person's life since childhood, the better for him. Each of us needs an adequate load necessary for normal development and the problems we create. You can try to get away from a lot of problems, but what will it bring? Today you are calm because you have Dutch difficult that you create a problem for you. You have a shift on somebody else. You have hidden, run away from it, and tomorrow it will press you against the wall and break you or destroy you. You are you are defenseless in the face of difficulties. If you avoid them all the time in order to deal with problems, including those that you could easily solve, but you chose to avoid them and did not pass the test necessarily for your development so that it will make you stronger. But you have a whole army of problems solved even the just experience trying to break you. You won't be afraid anymore with all that experience. So don't be afraid of problems, and in order to not afraid of them, you look for opportunities to solve them all the time, whether they're yours or someone else. It doesn't matter. The main thing is that you have them. To be exact, you will have them anyway, but it will be better if you find them yourself than if they find you. When some problems come up to you, and you have to ask yourself the right question or question that start looking into you. The question triggers the work of thinking, which creates new question that help you find and come up with your information with which you can solve the problem, turning into a problem. Thinking and knowledge is a cure for problems, and questions are search for the right knowledge through the reflection. By thinking, one moves from the known data about the problem to the unknown, which actually makes the problem a problem. He studies these unknown data and he understands that all their logic until he understands all the components of the problem that confronts him. All problems can be solved in this way. The only question is how long it will take to solve the problem. But the main thing is to engage in this kind of work, how to start or ignore the problem. My dear friends, do not look for easy ways in life, trying to avoid everything difficult and pleasant and interesting. Also, there is easy way. They often lead people to severe consequences. And yes, that's another thing. The problem themselves is not solved. And if some of them are solved, often not in the way we would like them to be. And do not afraid of solving the problems. In order to solve problem, as I mentioned, you have to be knowledgeable, study, make steps, and try to solve, make actions, and look for your results. If you're satisfied, it's fine for you. If you're dissatisfied, look back in history and find where you make mistakes and try to solve it. And also, the main point, my friends, do not be afraid. If you're afraid, you will lose all your ability, all your capacity to solve any problems. Thank you for attention. Today we just discussed about problems. Of course, you can find many videos on YouTube, or you can read many articles or lectures, but here I shared my observation and knowledge. You are free to write in below comments your own opinions, that what problems mean for you and how you solve your problems. See you soon, and thank you for your watching. See you next week.